Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, August 19th. The last time I did a weather podcast, I believe, was back on Sunday. Several weather podcasts were done on Sunday, and the last one, one of the last ones had the forecast for this upcoming week, and I think there was a lot of accuracy in that forecast. The forecast called for temperatures to remain in the 80s, even under the Canadian high pressure, and the temperatures afternoon high, official high at O'Hare Airport on Shabbos, 80 degrees. High on Sunday, 80 degrees. Monday's high, 80 degrees. Forecast called for a warm-up in temperatures for Tuesday as winds became southerly. High temperature Tuesday went to 84 degrees. Forecast high, low to mid-80s. Wednesday, forecast high mid to upper 80s. High temperature was 86 degrees. Thursday, this was the really big day where a lot of forecasts were forecasting mid-80s and then some said upper 80s, and I felt that you can't get less than the upper 80s this time of year if you're under the influence of a Bermuda high. High temperature today here in Chicago, the official high was 88 degrees. That was a wonderful round of applause for the 88 degrees. Dew points this afternoon were in the upper 60s to low 70s. Even some places got into the mid-70s. Now, yesterday we had also very humid conditions. There was a little bit of a drop in humidity here in the Chicago area at O'Hare Airport. Now, in all honesty, some of the places which had higher dew points, temperatures actually remained in the mid-80s. I think one of the reasons why the temperature hit 88 degrees here in Chicago was because the dew point dropped, and that allowed more energy to get released into the air, and that's when the temperatures increase. And you'll see that all the time. When afternoon dew points start to drop, that's when the temperatures start to increase. High temperature here, upper 80s. I think actually much of the area might have been in the mid 80s, but here in Chicago, high temperature was in the upper 80s. We remain under humid conditions for today. We're going to continue those humid conditions for tomorrow. Conditions remain humid on Shabbos, warm and humid tomorrow. We have some forecasts which are forecasting low 90s, like Tom Skilling. We'll call it for highs upper 80s tomorrow, and on Shabbos, National Weather Service is forecasting upper 80s. I think we'll call it for upper 80s. And there's going to be a cold front that's going to come through later on Saturday. Thunderstorms, possibly strong, maybe severe even, in the severe category, about a 1 to 5 of a risk, about a 5 to 15% chance within a 25-mile radius that we will see severe weather here in the Chicago area. High temperatures, upper 80s for Shabbos. That's the southerly winds, which are going to kick in on Shabbos, which are going to help keep those temperatures in the upper 80s. Friday we're going to have light winds, high temperatures probably upper 80s. Then we have that cold front that comes through. That cold front does basically nothing for the city like St. Louis, Missouri, where highs will remain in the low 90s. But big time heat for next week. It's really the consistency, the heat and the humidity. It's really those dew points, just those dew points. The dark sky weather map shows dew points in the upper 70s, just continuous. It's like unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. Hour after hour, you look at the Chicago dew point, you look at it, 76, 76, then 77, then 78, then back to 77, 75, then back up to 77. But you look at it hour by hour, starting already Monday afternoon, going through Tuesday, Wednesday. The dark sky weather map continues with high dew points past Wednesday. The National Weather Service has put us in a limited excessive heat risk Monday through Wednesday. But they said something which is unbelievable to me, and I'm going to say it, but I think maybe it was a typo or there's something above my head over here. So they said the heat index might be approaching 100 degrees. So that makes sense. I mean, That makes a lot of sense. We're going to see temperatures highs in the upper 80s. We're under the influence of a Bermuda high. The winds are coming right off of the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to be within a dome of heat. Thunderstorms might develop. The types of thunderstorms that are going to be developing next week will be similar to what happened last week, not this week. It's going to be super strong stuff. We're back in very high humidity. We're talking about upper 70s. We've even seen some cities are even going to be approaching 80 degrees, will be 80 degrees, dew points of 80. I didn't see any widespread 80 degree dew points like we saw last week. That's not currently in the forecast, but upper 70s all over the place, mid 70s also all over the place. So upper 70s, we're talking about a heat index making temperatures feel 14 degrees warmer than what they actually are. So you have temperatures in the upper 80s. You know, you can get a heat index of 100 or 102, and we've mentioned that when there's a little bit of a wind, the real field temperatures might actually be in the upper 90s, not at 102. It all has to do with the wet bulb temperature. But then the National Weather Service said a real shocker. The wet bulb temperature hasn't really popped up in their forecast discussion until today. Maybe they've mentioned it before. I have never seen it. The wet bulb temperature, they said it's going to be 90 degrees. It's got to be a mistake. Maybe they meant 80 degrees? 90 degrees wet bulb temperature, there are sources that say that's equivalent to a heat index of 155 degrees. So the wet bulb temperature is more accurate than heat index. It's more accurate than dew point. The heat index is figured out by looking at the dew point. But the wet bulb temperature is more accurate because it also takes the sun into consideration and the wind. If there's a wet bulb temperature, the question is, how could you have a wet bulb temperature higher than the actual temperature? So I'm going to assume that they meant to say 80 degrees. So let's say they meant to say the wet bulb temperature will be 80 degrees. That makes a lot of sense. A wet bulb temperature of 80 degrees. Does that make sense? I have to reflect upon that more. But let's say the wet bulb temperature is 80 degrees. One thing to keep in mind is that if a person's exercising with a wet bulb temperature of 80 degrees, there are sources that say that that's equivalent to a wet bulb temperature of 92 degrees for the exerciser. Anyways, heat index may approach 100. That might be heat advisory criteria since it's going to be over a 3-day period. We're going to continue to see above normal temperatures on Thursday. Cooler air is expected to move in by the end of next week, probably upper 70s by that time. And we have hurricanes all over the place, tropical storms all over the place. Hurricane Henry. This is going to be turning into a hurricane hitting the New England area, a Category 1 hurricane hitting New England. And right now, the highest dew points in the country are in Oklahoma. Pretty much, that's what it looked like. And surrounding states. The Galveston, Texas has dew points in the mid-70s. Same with Houston, Texas. Corpus Christi, Texas, dew point around 77. There is a city in Texas right on the ocean which has a dew point of 80 degrees. According to Dark Sky, at least at some point today, the dew point was 80 degrees. The highest dew point in the world that I saw was 85 degrees. Just remember, just a week ago, here in the Midwest, two cities in Iowa had a dew point of 86 degrees, and that was reported from Tom Skilling in the Tribune from a regional airport. So I have more confidence in the accuracy of that than Dark Sky. The reason why I question the accuracy of Dark Sky is just because the temperature they show for Chicago is always different than what you hear on the radio, and I just don't know where they're getting their weather information from, and why they're not getting it from O'Hare. Why can't you find weather information from O'Hare? I've looked for it and I can't find it. As of now, I've not been able to find weather information from O'Hare on the Dark Sky weather map. They have hundreds of cities, hundreds of weather stations, but I'm not able to find O'Hare, and that is an issue to me. In any case, I think that takes care of this week. The highlight of the week, in my opinion, is going to be the buildup of heat and humidity. And this one has high confidence. This week, we also had a buildup of heat and humidity. It started on Wednesday, and it even started on Tuesday, and it's continuing. It's continuing all the way through Shabbos. There wasn't such high confidence that this was going to happen, but there was mediocre confidence, and it did happen, nothing extreme. Next week, there's high confidence in the heat, and a number of forecasts are already forecasting highs to go into the low 90s for next week. I think if this would be happening in July, we would be seeing high temperatures in the mid-90s. And as a matter of fact, in the St. Louis area, high temperatures mid-90s. Heat index may approach 105 degrees for St. Louis. The National Weather Service is forecasting overnight lows to be in the mid-70s for a couple of days next week. That's an indicator of high dew points. My personal opinion in regards to this, this week I had my opinion. I said it'll be in the upper 80s on Thursday, not the mid-80s. If I had to do it over again, I'll tell you the truth, and I would acknowledge more of the mid-80s. I think I did, actually, because much of the area was only in the mid-80s. It happens to be Chicago did hit 88 degrees. For next week, those dew points that's something that's been a consistent theme here this summer. Whenever we're under the influence of a solid Bermuda high, those dew points go way, way up. Even yesterday, we were seeing dew points close to Chicago, dew points in the mid-70s. Not Chicago. Chicago had dew points in the low 70s, just normal, humid, normal, super humid stuff, but just normal stuff. Next week, under the influence of a Bermuda high, we've already seen dew points twice this year. One time per week going into the upper 70s. With the exception of this week, dew points have gone into the upper 70s twice within a 10-day period this year. And usually once a pattern starts, it continues. I think we will see dew points in the upper 70s for next week. I think there will be some locations which may get an 80-degree dew point. And I think those high temperatures are going to make it... That's a tough one. Probably whatever happened last week is going to happen next week. Highs in the low 90s. We're headed into late August. The sun is getting weaker. And in terms of normal high temperatures have dropped by 3 degrees. And I think it's pretty much safe to say also that if this air mass would be taking place in July, I think temperatures would be 3 degrees warmer. I'm not really getting that from the normal. I just think highs would be in the mid-90s. I think. Highs low to mid-90s. It would be a close call. We'll call it for highs right around 90 for next week, Monday through Wednesday, upper 80s. Possibly low 90s Monday through Wednesday. If we see the air is drier than currently expected, then temperatures will get hotter. Temperatures will go into the mid-90s. If we see that there are pop-up thunderstorms that mess up the heat, then that's a different story. But there is expected to be pretty strong capping in the afternoon, so thunderstorms are expected to hold off until evening. That's when we get the really strong storms. That's what's expected to develop next week. I wish everybody a good night. Enjoy the weather. It's really amazing weather this time of the year. You have high temperatures in the 80s. Nothing excessive. It might be 90 tomorrow, but it's still nothing excessive. And next week still, it's nothing super excessive. It's not brutal. It's not brutal heat as of now. Unless that wet bulb temperature of 90 degrees. What does that mean? What does that mean? What is that? Where did that come from? That's a Tzarachin Gadol. That's the mystery over here. That's a big mystery. And the truth is, I can't really say a forecast with complete confidence until I have a good understanding of what is going on with that wet bulb temperature of 90 degrees. If we're actually getting a wet bulb temperature of 90 degrees next week, I think it's going to be brutal heat. But I'm going to assume for now that that's a mistake. Either maybe it meant to say 30 degrees Celsius, maybe a wet bulb temperature of 86 degrees, or a wet bulb temperature of 80 degrees. Those are the possibilities. Or maybe it's talking about putting the thermometer in the sun, but then it would seem to be hotter. No, maybe that's what it is. You put the thermometer in the sun, so temperatures are approximately 14 degrees hotter than what they would be if you're in a place where the sun is right over your head. In a place like Chicago, I heard it's 8 degrees warmer than what it actually is. So then you would have daytime highs. The National Weather Service is calling for afternoon highs upper 80s, so let's call it at 88, although on their weather app they're saying highs in the low 90s. But let's call it for a high of 88 degrees. Then the sunshine puts that temperature of 96 on the thermometer, and then with the evaporation, temperature and the wind, temperatures drop to 90 degrees. Maybe that's what it means. In the sun, we will have a wet bulb temperature of 90 degrees. The question is, what's it going to be in the shade? What will that wet bulb temperature be in the shade? That's the question, and that's the question we're going to have to deal with. Anyways, there probably will be an update on this podcast later on. I wish everyone a good Shabbos in case there's not an update. Have a great weekend. I wanted to end off with a Mishnah, but we're not going to do it right now. Maybe in the next podcast.